Hello and welcome to The Conversation. My name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Blacks and Jews in Conversation, not just Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And with me tonight is our special guest, Mr. Rafael Rodriguez. He's the president and founder of the July 4th, 1899 Foundation. In case you don't know what that date means, you're in my company, because I found out only recently. We are now about to begin a series of shows with the Puerto Rican community. We will be rebroadcasting one that I did a little while ago of the 50th anniversary of the Puerto Rican Bar Association in conjunction with the 50th anniversary of the Puerto Rican Parade. And unlike those other organizations, we have a particular point of view here represented on this show, and all points of view are welcome, including those who are different from Mr. Rodriguez. I met our gentleman guest with the coordinator this year, with Roy and Niger Innes, at the celebration, the memorial at the same time, in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King and his legacy of civil rights in January. And I have been introduced to many organizations. I am introduced to Democrats, Republicans, and this is a Republican. And he is looking forward to an independent state of Puerto Rico. We have many judges, very distinguished, the gentlemen and ladies who have gone with us throughout the country to various colleges and universities representing the Hispanic community, not just in that context, but to represent our organization and the judiciary, and at the same time dialoguing with all students of different denominations who weren't quite there in getting to know each other and have made invaluable contributions, whether at Binghamton or at Stony Brook or at NYU or at the University of Texas or in Orlando or in Vermont. And they speak not only as members of the Hispanic community, but as members of the judicial community, as eloquent representatives of a community seeking justice and togetherness. And our guest is here to say that Puerto Rico deserves the same treatment as any other territory did seeking statehood in the United States. That Puerto Rico right now is a territory of the United States. If you were to go back in history of the United States, you had the original colonies on the East Coast, whether settled by England or France or Spain, and then you had the Louisiana Purchase, and you had, after Napoleon said, I had enough of this, and I'm fighting England, and that's enough for me, and you can have this to do what you want, and we carved territories out of that. We had the Mexican-American War, we had more territories, and they each sought statehood, a la Oklahoma fame, with that musical, such as California and Nebraska and the Dakotas. Puerto Rico has since 1899, when I imagine this is the date that you first had a group of people that said it's time to stop the movement for independence, has been seeking the same transfer of status from territorial to statehood. And with that, I will turn to our guest. Of course, he's far more knowledgeable on this subject than I am, but when it comes to history, I give you advance notice. I'm familiar with the Spanish-American War. I'm familiar with the Civil War in Spain and in the Philippines and so on. So we'll have lots of interesting discussion ahead. And please get on our website, not just blacksandjewsinconversation.org, and we will have our guest give you his website, communicate especially with him. And tomorrow, Wednesday, we have on February 7th at Stuyvesant High School a first for us, Hispanic, African American, Jewish, Asian, all types of students at Stuyvesant High School. The New York Pops is coming. We have bridged the gap here, a new school added to the Kids in the Balcony program. The Pops has a concert this Friday at Carnegie Hall, and apart from the concert and the tickets that are being given complimentary, through the generosity of the POP's benefactors to select students at Stuyvesant. I, of course, will be working. There will be a performance by Maureen McGovern and lectures and discussions led by Dr. Sherry Miracle, who has been a guest on this program. She's a percussionist for the POPs and the POPs Director of Education. And she'll be coming with a select group of musicians, I believe most of them women, and as well as Maureen McGovern, who's been with the POPs for I don't know how many years, a singer of exceptional renown and prowess, and especially for the Stuyvesant community. Brought to you by Not Just Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And with that, we now turn to our guest. I'm going to turn over the mic to him and let him begin at the beginning, talking about his particular foundation and the purposes of the foundation, identify how you can reach it, and what its goals are. Go ahead.
Thank you, Shannon, for having me here in your show this evening. Like Shannon had mentioned, my name is Rafael Rodriguez, and I head the July 4th, 1899 Foundation. We are a policy and advocacy think tank with the purpose of advocating for the discussion that is presently in Congress, which is the status issue of Puerto Rico. We believe that Congress needs to create the adequate mechanism to allow the people of Puerto Rico to decide their political destiny. Yes, he mentioned that about statehood, and yes, personally I advocate the issue of statehood because I believe that that's a different option to what many options have been presented to our community here within the United States and in the island of Puerto Rico. We believe that given the opportunity to the Puerto Rican community to be well informed on the position of statehood as a different alternative, that would help create a better understanding of why we want to be much closer with the United States as our nation in which we belong to. One of the fears presently that a lot of people have in terms of is cultural loss, the economic impact in the island, and other issues of concern, which we are also wanting to bring into dialogue. But I believe that in terms of the cultural aspect, we will not lose our cultural identity for the purpose that we see generations of Puerto Ricans born here in the United States, like myself. I identify myself with the island, with this cultural heritage, with the ideals, with the smells, the taste. I have never lost sight of that or lost the sense of it. On the contrary, it has enhanced my being an American, because the beautiful thing about this country is that we can be able to mix all different types of cultures and peoples together to make a beautiful society. And that's the intention of us as well, to be part of the society. And through the foundation, one of our main causes is to educate, first of all, on the status issue, to let the people, not only the Puerto Rican community, but also other Latinos and non-Latinos as well, to have an understanding of what's happening in the island. Shannon mentioned that the name of the organization, which he heard for the first time, the date. The reason why we chose the name, the July 4th, 1899, is because on that day, Dr. Jose Celso Barbosa founded the Puerto Rican Republican Statehood Party in the island, with the sole purpose to show solidarity with the United States, and as well as to advocate for Puerto Rico to become part of the United States as the 51st state, or at that time, we could say the 48th, because Hawaii and Alaska were not yet part of the Union at that present moment. but he advocated for statehood, as well as we have Luis Muñoz Rivera, who also was a staunch statehood advocate and a co-party member of Dr. Barbosa. And we have others throughout history who supported the statehood ideals in Puerto Rico because they wanted to see Puerto Rico as part of the United States for the many benefits. What are those benefits? The benefits is representation, is being able to have a voice, is being able to give your opinion through your representative so that he can represent you in Congress in your interests. Just like any states here, we see New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Texas, and all these other states that have representatives in Congress working for the people. Puerto Rico has none. We only have a resident commissioner who has no voting power, just a voting through committees. So we strive for that. We advocate for that position to be able to have a voice. But the main purpose of our function is to educate the Puerto Rican, Latino, and non-Latino community on particular issue of the status of Puerto Rico in its present form. Puerto Rico being a U.S. territory or a commonwealth has a form of local government that can administer its affairs. But in terms of federal representation, like I mentioned, we don't have any. And
Let me stop you there.
sure.
Two questions.
Mm-hmm.
First, we have been discussing before about about the commissioner, and he's like a governor, except that when we have an association of governors of the United States, and they have their annual meetings, and Governor Schwarzenegger comes there, and so on. Does the commissioner go to that association of governors and part his thoughts and so on, and can he be part of any resolutions of the association of governors? I know he has an office in Washington, you said, and he can't vote in the Congress, but he can be part of the committees. The governors have committees too. Can he be part of those committees? How wide-reaching is his action? And secondly, as far as the date, it is almost contemporaneous with the Spanish-American War. Now, where in regards to that war was the movement for independence? Did it obviously it was against Spanish rule.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously it was for a liberation of the island. But when the Americans then gained control of Puerto Rico, what relationship did that bear on the independence movement at that time?
Well, first of all, going to the resident commissioner, the resident commissioner can participate in many activities and events with other legislators, governors, so forth and so on. The island of Puerto Rico does have its governor who participates in these conferences. As a matter of fact, in 1996, I believe, the governor of Puerto Rico used to be the president of the chairman of the Southern Governors Association, and there was always that fraternity because all governors, be it from Puerto Rico or the territories, participate in these organizations. But when it comes to policy, if they happen to invite the resident commissioner to speak or to address, most definitely he would partake of that and be able to, I guess I would assume, use that moment as a platform of in terms of the status issue and what Puerto Rico's political plight is presently. On the U.S. invasion into Puerto Rico, that happened in July of 1898 in the beaches of Guanica. Prior to that, we have in history that recalls what's called El Grito de Lares, which happened around in 1865 or so, where the people in Puerto Rico, particularly within the community of Lares, cried out for independence from Spain. Why? It was mainly because Spanish rule in Puerto Rico was not fair. The Spaniards never gave Puerto Rico a voice to be able to address their concerns unto the Spanish courts or unto the House of Deputies, or whatever form of government Spain used or uses in terms of, we have here the House of Representatives, the Senate, the Congress. So in Spain it would be the House of Deputies or the court. So the people of Puerto Rico kind of got tired of not having that voice, of not having that representation that they so wanted to have, being part of the Spanish crown, but not being able to have the representation that they required. So if we can see, historically, there's a parallel there, because you see that under the Spanish rule, they didn't have the voice that they so much wanted to have, and the representation that each Spanish territory would require. We can see the same thing here, where Puerto Rico, being part of the U.S., has a representative in Congress, but at the same time that representative cannot vote in the House, and as well as the people of Puerto Rico cannot vote in the general elections. They vote for their local government, they vote for their state representatives and their governor and their mayors and their officials in the municipalities. But when it comes into the federal elections, we have no vote. We have no ability to participate. Yet, it's interesting because when it's primary time, Puerto Rico is part of the primary process for the presidency, and all the Democrats and Republicans that are running for office will head to Puerto Rico to obtain funds and the support in the primary. But when it comes to the general elections, we lack that. When it comes to general representation, we lack that. Now,
what about the separatist movements of the early 70s? There was an independence movement that attacked Francis Tavern and caused considerable loss of life. Mm-hmm. And they were jailed then and then pardoned, of course, by none other than President Clinton, mm-hmm. Who had nothing to do but pardon these kind of felons. And at the same time, he pardoned Mark Rich. I don't see any of that today. I really see a quiescence and the type of movement for an independent Puerto Rico. It's rather a sophisticated, pacifist type of independence movement. Isn't that strange for an independence movement?
Well, you see, what's happening in Puerto Rico, okay, you have a pro-independence, pro-nationalist movement. You have what's called the status quo, or the Commonwealth, and then you have those of us that support the statehood ideals to become part of the Union with the United States as the 51st state. The problem within the nationalist or pro-independence movement is that they have not been able to gain ground on their ideals as they would love to. But it's interesting because every time we see elections, we always see that they have between a margin of 2 to 3% in the votes in Puerto Rico for governor, for their representatives, for mayor. They never are able to catch fire in terms of getting a governor elected or additional members into the Senate or House in Puerto Rico elected, which presently they only have one senator and one representative. But I never discount that, because be it that they may get 3%, they do have a loud voice, and a voice that's influential. The problem is that the agenda that they carry and that they present at times does not seem realistic. At times does not seem that it makes sense, because when you propose ideas and you propose an agenda where you still want to depend on the nation that you're trying to separate from, it makes no sense. They talk about that they would want independence, but they would need a 10-year process in order to stabilize Puerto Rico economically. At the same token, they ask that, well, we could probably allow that the Puerto Ricans can maintain the U.S. citizenship and U.S. passport, and have dual citizenship. You know, these are things that make no sense. Because if you're clamoring to become independent, you want to separate totally. You don't want to deal with any more with the United States. You want to burn your bridges and form your own nation and form your own country.
That's what was done in Africa. When they had independence, that was it, and you got out of there quick. And the Mau Mau and so, they did it with a violence that, you know, I mean, the French fought in Algiers for years, and the British fought in Africa for years, and they tried to hold on to the Congo for years, and they had their own civil wars, and the death toll was in the tens of thousands. And, of course, we don't want to see anything like that happening in Puerto Rico, but at the same time, I don't see an independence movement ever taking place with any notoriety. And at the same time, as you wisely point out, they have no plan. They have what are you going to do about taxes? What are you going to do about armed forces? What are you going to do about a government structure? And so on and so on. Now, I noticed that you have a long list of able credentials. President, founder of this foundation. You have been president of Brooklyn Young Republicans. That's a lot of courage in Brooklyn to be the president of Young Republicans in Brooklyn. And the state assembly candidate, youth and Christian education director, and the District of Queens for Church of God, and former pastor of Monticello Church of God, board member of the Sullivan County Anti-Poverty Coalition, Human Rights Committee for Monticello Police Department. Were you police?
No, but as clergyman in Monticello, the chief of police requested me to ride with their patrol units to observe and make sure that when the police would do an arrest or try to bring public order, that it was done in a more humane manner as possible without creating abuse or scenes where people would claim that there would be abuse. So we would kind of be an observer to make sure that things would run as smoothly as possible for the benefit of the police department and the community of Monticello.
That's this organization. It's quiet and everything would run smooth. And I see that you're radio host for the program The Shepherd Staff, a part of the Monticello Church, and Jamaica Church of God, and so on. And we have nothing against loud voices here either. I believe very strongly in loud voices. Now let's turn to Spanish art, because right now in the city you had history of Picasso and his influence on American artists, of which was Jasper Johns and 10 others at the Whitney. And then at the Guggenheim, you had 500 years of Spanish art showing Picasso influenced by Goya as well as El Greco. Do you believe that Puerto Rican artists and music are given their fair share, fair play, or do you believe it's on the ascendancy? My cousins certainly are very fond of Puerto Rico. They have a ranch there where they ride horses. They can't stay away from it. They're there now. And I have to wait for them to return to pay a visit to our old friend Pete Seeger, who has been of great assistance to our programs in the past. So what can we expect to see from the art and culture of Puerto Rico in the future? Because that, of course, is a great part of any independence movement and of communication and of any state.
Well, it's interesting because the artists, be it artists in terms of music, movie actors, painters, and so forth and so on. I mean, we have a whole list. You know, we've been blessed. You know, the island, for being so small, has been able to produce so many talented figures that have influenced American culture in so many ways. And it's unfortunate that as well that within the community of artists, you always have those dissenters. But again, it's because of one key issue: identity and culture. It's the national pride. Anyone would feel that way. I mean, the seeing Miss Universe win, that sort of like brings up the national pride. Wow, a Puerto Rican female being Miss Universe. It's beautiful. It's nice. But at the same token, we have to realize that being part of this nation, we can continue to contribute and enhance the American society, because that's what it's all about. It's one nation under God, unifying every individual from every walk of life and being able to contribute.
What do you think about West Side Story? If you were to point at any one example that would feature a Puerto Rican statehood, independence, community, culture, conflict, immigration, migration, everybody would think of West Side Story by Leonard Bernstein. Do you think of that as a discriminatory message? Do you think of it as something that paints too much stereotype? Do you think of it only in terms of the music and the dance? What are your reflections?
Wow, I haven't seen West Side Story for a long time. Let's see. It depends on what point of view you look at it.
You see, I date myself.
It depends on what is your point of view when you analyze the movie as you watch it. I look at it mainly from a artistical point of view, but at the same token, yes, you have to understand that in that period of time, you had these conflicts between, in particular, because it was the 40s, you had the Puerto Ricans against the Italians or the Irish. I believe that it was being depicted in the movie. So you had these conflicts, just like you had it in any other community from the turn of the century here in New York City, with the Irish and the Italians and the English and the Chinese and so forth and so on. There's always been that kind of conflict, but in the long run, you start to come together as a community, because of course, these things, they happen anywhere. I look at it as a sense of, kids being kids, doing their thing because that's what people do. Not justifying it, but at the same token, I'm saying that these are elements that happen. It's something that we can only say that when you see time pass, it heals, and you look at it as these are moments in history where we have situations like this of racial tension, racial division, racial problems. But at some point, we have to come together to be able to say, hey, we saw what happened in the past. Now let's build a better future.
Well, that couldn't be a better message on which to end for our organization, at least, and for the future of our country in these troubled times. I certainly hope we don't have more issues to divide us. I thank you so very much, Mr. Rodriguez, for coming, and I hope to see more of your organization and yourself. We have about 5 seconds left, and all I can say is Viva Puerto Rico, and I hope to be back there soon with many of you together.